Good day, everyone, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar. We're super happy that you're with us. Our topic today is who's in your cloud, the case for visibility in DevOps. Today's webinar is being sponsored by OffSource. Happy to be talking with the great folks. I'm sorry, OpsCompass, mistyped the name here. My name is Mitch Ashley, and I'll serve as your host and moderator. A few housekeeping items. We are recording the webinar, and everyone will get an email with a link to the recording, and also I believe we're giving a copy of the slides. We'll confirm that as well. I know that our speakers love questions, so we're going to try to make this as interactive as possible. We've got some great polls and some things that we'll be talking with you about. So put your question in the questions tab at any time. We'll get to it if it's in the flow of the conversation, or try to catch it at the end. So we're also giving away 4 gift cards, so please stick around to the end to find out if you're one of our lucky winners. So let's move on to our topic. Who's in your cloud? The case for visibility in DevOps. First, I'd love to introduce John Grange, who is CTO with OpsCompass, and also Kevin Hawkinson, who is Director of Customer Success with OpsCompass. And sorry about the name at the beginning, guys. Welcome.
Hey, thanks for having us, Mitch.
You bet, you bet. I'm going to turn things over to you.
Awesome. So just to quickly introduce ourselves to everybody, again, we're OpsCompass. We provide security and compliance to customers that are scaling their cloud operations. My name is John Grange. I'm co-founder and CTO of OpsCompass. I'll pass the ball here to Kevin in a second, but just by way of introductions, our company is really focused on how we can fill in the gaps in a whole kind of governance, security, compliance process with the deep visibility that all the different inputs need to produce the correct outputs. So really excited to talk more about that today, and I'll kick it to Kevin Hawkinson, our Director of Customer Success here at OpsCompass.
Yeah, I lead up our customer success org. I talk to a lot of customers, but I come from background as an enterprise architect, as a software developer, as an architect. So I really love digging into the DevOps flow, talking to customers, kind of just thinking about that whole visibility across the spectrum point of view. So it's a lot of fun to hear how different customers do different things, which is also why I love questions in the chat. It's a lot of fun to dig into the cloud, and it's complicated as well. Let's kick it off, John, and let's kind of talk about what we're really talking about here today.
Yeah, I think the kind of core problem statement that we want to just address today, because we see it over and over again with our customers and prospects, is this idea that cloud and DevOps leaders don't have the right visibility into their cloud state, and it limits success. And notice that we said the right visibility, not they don't have visibility, because generally there's different kind of types of visibility. It's a big kind of loaded term. But what we're going to talk about today is some of those gaps that we would consider the right visibility, and some of the gaps that are preventing customers from getting there.
Yeah, thanks, John. When we were building that slide, getting that visibility queued up in the right, just because there's so many examples of visibility that some organizations have deep visibility into some aspects, but almost kind of none into others. And even finding that balance of what's right versus what's too much versus what's too little. It's that Goldilocks problem of visibility. You just need the right stuff at the right time. So I like to, kick off like some poll questions at the beginning of these, right? And originally I wanted to say, hey, Star Wars or Star Trek, or what's your favorite Star Wars character or something. So if you have a favorite Star Wars character,
we wanted to get to the meat early.
Right. We wanted to get to the meat early. But as you can see on my bookshelf back here, I'm a big Star Wars fan. I got the LP from the 70s. I got the old legacy books now from all the characters that aren't true anymore. Some kind of diehard back in the day. I'm a super big Thrawn fan. Luckily, they brought him back into canon. But if you have a favorite Star Wars character, drop in the chat, because I always like to hear that. But since the webinar isn't about visibility in Star Wars, it's really about DevOps. So I was kind of curious, what type of threat is your biggest concern when it comes to cloud security, right? Is it those malicious insiders, those compromised accounts, stuff that people are doing? Is it that the malware, the ransomware, the cryptojacking, those kind of people coming in trying to get, take your data, get some money? Is it human errors? Is it people just kind of making mistakes? Is it a lack of knowledge, stuff you just haven't learned yet? Or is it just the continuous change that are happening in your environment? So if you take kind of a moment now, and like the poll's in progress, we're collecting responses, kind of what's it at? So, all right. How long? We're about 48 seconds into the poll. Looks like it's coming along pretty well.
A few more coming in.
And I think that human error and lack of knowledge are kind of related too. Just as I'm looking at those, it comes up every time we're talking to companies of any size, that kind of worry that how do we upskill our team? How do we, support a growing cloud environment with kind of the same teams? They have to grow their skills. How do we do it? So that's something that we hear all the time, and that immediately jumped to my mind as I'm looking at these poll questions.
How about we put the results here? And we've got some good responses. Ready to check?
Yeah, let's do that. Let's go ahead and pull that up and see it. It's interesting because I talk to a lot of customers about just cloud adoption, and a lot of them come in and they're just tell us the things we don't know. We don't even know what we don't know. So I would have probably thought lack of knowledge would have been higher, but I guess it's self-fulfilling. If you don't know, you don't have the knowledge, maybe you're not worried about it yet because you haven't seen it. That's kind of interesting to me. What do you think is interesting to you, John? What's kind of the top one you think here that's?
Well, I think the sort of magnitude of the malware, ransomware, cryptojacking response is interesting. I think that just points to, I think anybody in this industry works with people that have been affected by ransomware, for instance. So not wholly surprising, but maybe a little bit just compared to the other ones. But going back to the lack of knowledge leads to human error. So I think that those are a little bit related. And if you kind of combine the two together, I think it's pretty clear that folks are really worried about that ransomware because it's brutal and it's really tough to recover from. And then obviously, like, hey, lots of kind of cooks in the kitchen here. Do they really know what they're doing?
Yeah.
And I think that's pretty consistent with, I'm not allowed to, I was trying to answer the poll myself, but I'm not allowed to as a presenter, but I probably would have been in there too.
One thing, misconfiguration is often how people get in. So human error is a big one too. So it wasn't that big in this poll, but that's kind of interesting.
What's kind of curious to me is the lowest thing on the poll was continuous changes, but that's what we're talking about today. So either that means that the webinar is way off, or the webinar is right on, because it's one of those things that teams need visibility into, the fact that these continuous changes kind of are happening and they might play a factor. So I guess we'll we'll figure out along the way where we're at. John, do you want to kind of tell people about cloud state monitoring?
Yeah, so just kind of level setting. So we talked about kind of having the right visibility into the cloud state. And that word state, I think, is really important. And it's kind of at the core of what we're going to talk about here today, but it's this idea of cloud state monitoring. And I have a definition up here, but, and everybody can read, but a lot of it's about plugging into the APIs and maintaining an exact or as close to exact definition of that environment's configuration state as possible, so that then you can really gain insights from determining how things are changing in that environment. And one of the things that I think companies struggle with when talking about just conceptually state is so much of IT was built around the idea of logs, and that you could essentially construct a state of things from logs. And one of the troubles within the cloud is you can, somebody makes a change to a load balancer or to a service that ends up making then a change to a load balancer. A log might just show, hey, a user made a change and updated this resource at this time. But in terms of having real visibility into sort of security, compliance, your overall operation, it needs to be easier for you to know, well, what did it look like before? Who did it? What pipeline did it come out of? We have lots and lots of projects and applications. What does this mean? So it doesn't necessarily replace state monitoring as a concept, doesn't necessarily replace a lot of the things that folks are doing, but what they're doing by not focusing at all on the cloud state, they're leaving lots of gaps in terms of what they're able to see, how they're able to support their different CI/CD pipelines, their different stakeholders in the cloud, et cetera.
Yeah, when we were originally talking about state and state monitoring, it's you think back to things like stateful protocols, and everybody that's building a web app wants it to be stateless. They just want to have a request come in, and stateful at some point got a negative connotation, like, oh, you have session affinity, you need state, state is bad, everything should be stateless. But just understanding your prior state and your current state, and understanding the delta or the change in what's happening in your cloud resources becomes a factor too. It's almost like if I remembered my calculus better, I'd feel like we're doing some derivatives or something like that here, and understanding like slope. But understanding this, the change in things in the state, that just becomes kind of key to like one part of your cloud monitoring that you want to know about and want to know your visibility. Maybe it changes and it changes back, right? Is it the event you care about, or is it the change or the velocity of it? So I think it's just an interesting way to think about it, thinking about these changes as like a stream of data versus thinking about them as a kind of individual data points that you just go ahead and monitor at a point in time. Let's see, should we move on? Any good questions coming up in the chat so far?
Yeah, that's the whole, I've got a couple here. Let's kind of toss this one out and see what you guys think. What should an organization's priorities be for 2021 when it comes to cloud security? Pretty broad question, but I think folks are sort of like, what do we need to worry about this over the next 12 months?
To me, I think, go ahead, Kevin. Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
Yeah, sure, I'll go. One of the things I talk about with customers, I like to pull up the DevOps infinity diagram, or I like to pull up the DevSecOps infinity diagrams that come out. The DoD one's really good, the Gartner one's good. And the reason I like them is they've got security in it and they've got the inner loops. So when I'm thinking about what your focus for 2021 might be, is look at that whole life cycle and look at the transitions that go in that life cycle, from checking in code to testing to deploying to operational monitoring to dev monitoring, and focus on just making sure you understand the handoffs, you understand what could break, what things change state, where do you want to monitor? Do you just monitor in dev? Do you just monitor in operations? Do you monitor along the path? So that's the thing that I think is like for 2021, people just understand that full life cycle and not kind of treat it as like silos of information. That's kind of what I've been talking to customers about. John, what about you?
I mean, what I would say is very similar. So I think that there's another tact, and I mentioned it earlier. I think focusing on the skills gap is a big deal, and I mentioned it for that reason before. But also part of the skills isn't just being able to maybe pass a test for a cloud certification, although that is really good and important. But really having an understanding for how the clouds work, how the services tend to work, having an understanding that kind of goes out beyond just the very specific things you're doing. Because what companies have kind of found, I think, is, okay, now they're kind of in the cloud. Well, most companies have workloads, at least some have a lot, and it becomes more about scaling. So it's like, are the things you're doing today scalable? Because the cloud footprint can grow really fast. And I think it kind of starts with the people, and then you need to think about kind of what are the different inputs that you need to help those people be successful.
All right, thanks for that question.
Yeah, that was good.
Let's talk about the struggle, John. What's the struggle we've been hearing?
Well, the struggle ends up being that it all works really great when you have like a single project or a couple single projects where, you can use Terraform, you can use any number of technologies to sort of have a solid pipeline of delivering code, leveraging services, making sure it's secure, it's really easy to audit, et cetera. But one of the things is that you run into is that most companies don't stop at a project or two. It goes into an entire, multi-cloud estate potentially with, hundreds of applications or projects. So just kind of the basic question of, what's the state of our environment? What do we have? What's our posture? Very hard to discern. So state often lives in, templates, and you're in Terraform sitting in a TF file on like a build server somewhere. Kevin, I'll probably kick it to you to talk about this a little more because you've got a lot of great experience here. But I mentioned multi-cloud, but just the definition of the management plane, control plane, data plane, like where you actually get the definitions of your resources and how, it's all very different. So a lot of the work, any of the work you do in one cloud doesn't necessarily transfer to the other, and you're relying on these APIs. So you end up in this mode where you've got the actual, your state, the thing you care about, the reality, is sort of living in disparate systems. There's not often like a centralized place where you're inspecting and gaining intelligence from these things. And it's the scale part of it that actually puts pressure on these processes. It's not necessarily the technology. So it's going, like I said, it's going from a project or two to 50 or 100 projects. That's the problem. It's not that a lot of these other approaches don't work.
Yeah, no, that's great. I was doing some research and some presentations on this whole management plane or control plane versus data plane, and digging into it in each of the cloud providers. And that's where you see, when you compare like the couple of the big cloud providers, you look at an AWS and they've got a control plane, but they are really region focused. So they have regional based endpoints. You get stuff out of a region. And stuff is also pretty account focused. With some stuff in organizations makes it a little easier to come together, and not a lot of things you can get it across regions. So your visibility into AWS is one way because they've picked that as their boundary for a blast radius. But an Azure has got a global management plane endpoint that everything routes to, which means that if you go into Azure, yeah, maybe they've got some problems if they can't load balance it, but you have full visibility kind of into everything in the Azure portal across everything. So there's two different philosophies of how the management plane should work. Obviously there's some stuff like IAM and AWS that is global, but those two things make it hard for companies with multiple workloads or transitioning from one cloud to realize, well, how do I see this? Because things don't exactly compare, but they kind of use some of the same terms, but not for exactly the same meaning. So that's kind of one of the things I've been noticing that's been hard about visibility. The other thing is, and we'll see this later when I'm doing some demo. I was playing around with some Terraform and some things, and it wasn't working out so well for me. So I'm going to kind of show off some of the things I learned just about who's making changes and how these changes are made later on. But the stuff, you might think everything's in the template, but I couldn't get something to work, so I had to go in the portal and change it. And then the history of it getting out of sync and changes is kind of interesting to view. We're going to be taking a look at that kind of later in the webinar today. And like the APIs are constantly changing. Anything else you want to add to this one, John? Or should we kind of move on?
Yeah, we can move on in it because it kind of blends in here to what I was thinking about saying. But also the state, just kind of circling back to like the important part of it is that in the shared responsibility model in the clouds, in terms of what the cloud provider is responsible for, what you're responsible for, it often ends up being everything that you're responsible for lives in the state that comes off of those APIs. So there's just sort of a greater importance when you're using like these cloud native services, I think, to really focusing there. And for a lot of the reasons that you just mentioned, it's actually really hard kind of at scale to square all that and have kind of a single source of truth.
Mm-hmm.
So this slide, it's not meant to be a project level approach versus like a state-based approach as if they're kind of alternatives, right? They're not, it's not either or. It's actually, what we're actually trying to get across here is that a lot of people, because you start in the cloud with only like a workload, all of the processes and even some of the tooling is built around this kind of project level approach. And what we're really talking about is, hey, like one of the keys to really scaling this, kind of the missing piece, is really understanding your cloud state. So this slide here is actually kind of about fleshing that out. It's not really about saying, hey, thinking about things at a project level is bad.
Yeah, to me, John, it goes a little back to when we first were kicking off the early parts of the slide. What's the right level of visibility? If I'm that project team, right, and I've got that project level approach, I need a lot of deep visibility into my projects. I want to see those 3,000 problems that are showing up. I want it to dive in. I'm looking at those logs. It's an important part of the program. I want to shift left. I don't want to like push something out to prod that's going to be broken. So I need a different level of visibility there. If I'm maybe sitting up at that enterprise level group or an oversight group or a security group, or I just want some audit, I kind of want to see everything all at once, but I want to maybe have a different level of visibility there. Maybe I care more about validating the outcomes, that something didn't change in the portal that didn't come from a DevOps pipeline. Somebody logged in and made a change there. Maybe I just have that complex environment, and I kind of want that one dashboard that pulls in stuff across regions of cloud providers and kind of categorizes stuff together where the same types of change are making. So I totally agree. It's not an either or. You can't just decide you're not having DevSecOps on projects. That's super important. But then you can't think that that's just going to replace that operational visibility as well. So again, it's all part of that DevOps, SecOps, infinity loop. It's all coming back around. There's inner loops to monitor on each side. Like I said, this is a great kind of kind of like multiple levels of awareness that you need to have. So defense and depth from a visibility point of view.
Yeah, and the business and developers are going to really drag you kind of into the cloud, into a different cloud, into these different services. So there's a part of it that is, on a given project level that you've built your framework for that project, but you kind of need to have a level of kind of agility or flexibility, I think, because as much as we'd like to have a lot of control and be able to enforce consistency and all these guardrails everywhere, and we know the reality is that M&A happens, and there's different teams and different stakeholders, and sometimes different rules. So there's on the side on the right, on the state-based approach, I think that there's some flexibility that's really part of why it scales pretty well. That isn't necessarily baked into that typical shift left CI/CD based approach.
Yeah, that M&A example, that's one that hits customers I talk to. They've got everything they think set up great. They got Terraform, they got these checks, everything, and then they acquired somebody, right? And that organization they acquired isn't to the same level of maturity yet. It's going to be hard to get them on board. Just even figuring out what they have in the cloud, it kind of forces you to take that two-phased approach, or that dual approach to visibility until you can get them up to speed. And then honestly, some teams just don't follow the rules. They decide they're going to go off on their own and use their own Terraform or something like that. So kind of getting the full visibility and the right visibility become really important.
Are you saying that everybody doesn't do the perfect right thing all the time?
Well, not any teams that I have been in charge of, but I've heard rumors of other teams out there that maybe don't follow the rules because I used to be a developer. I always knew better than everyone anyway. So, so like this is an interesting one too when it ties back, John, to the who's making changes and the project team. So who is making changes in the cloud? Isn't it just me and my DevOps pipeline? Am I not the king of my destiny?
Well, no, definitely not. And, we're used to saying who's making changes and thinking about humans. And in the cloud context, it's probably quite a few more humans making changes in your cloud than maybe what you're used to in the data center or on-prem environment. But also cloud provider identities, your own service identities for various products and other things that you're using. So it's kind of a much different ballgame. And I think that, and I'm interested in your perspective, Kevin, just because you really come from the enterprise kind of cloud architect world, but the non-human actions that are taking, whether it's for the ones that you control or the cloud provider, that seems to me to be a total flip from kind of how we thought about these things kind of pre-cloud.
Yeah, no, I have a couple examples I bring up. One, I talk to customers a lot about tagging cloud resources, getting tag policies in place. And in Azure, if you take the tag policies under Azure policy, you can actually have them not just audit, but modify things or even deny things. So if I was this automation team or a platform team that says, we're enforcing this tag, and I turn on this policy and I actually will deny a deployment if the policy fails, that could go back and break a DevOps team pipeline. So a DevOps team maybe doesn't make any change, and now all of a sudden they push out a release and now it fails. And they don't know why it fails. And it failed because some, eager platform team decided today's the day I'm enforcing this automatic policy. Or it could have been one of those automatic modify policies, and now the resource in my Terraform file with my tags doesn't match the tags that are in my cloud resource because I put in this Azure policy that went and appended tags. And now I'm getting some sort of like, oh, state difference between what I thought was my source of truth in a Terraform state file, but what's actually in the cloud. And it wasn't because a human went into a portal, it was because of automation. So that's kind of one of the examples I bring up when I'm talking to customers. Another one, when we get to kind of like the demo, show and tell area, I'm going to point out just when I set up AWS SSO in place, so I could link from Azure. Just one of the things that was created for me that I wasn't aware of. So that's a couple examples I've been thinking of. Or are you thinking of a different one that I should talk about, John?
I don't think a specific one, but like just in general, one of the things that I see that's definitely like weird when you come across it is so all these template languages are declarative. So your state is essentially what you've declared. The cloud provider adds new features, new potential attributes, and they have a default value. So now you have a resource out there that has an actual configuration of value, sometimes a meaningful one, that you actually weren't totally aware of. And that's almost like, to me, kind of the quintessential gap or disconnect that we're really talking about here, I guess.
Yeah, that's a great one. In fact, that's one I forgot, and I shouldn't have, because I actually are going to be even talking about that later. Just new features that are released in the cloud, new security features, they up in a PaaS service. Now all of a sudden you have the ability to turn them on. And maybe you know about them, maybe you don't, but if you're constantly monitoring the state of your resources, you're going to see these additional properties on it, and you're going to now realize, hey, this is maybe something I could change and do. Maybe it's not a change I made, but it's a potential change. That's a great example. Thanks for that.
And sometimes they're defaults. So sometimes it's not even something that you have to elect to change. Now, typically those defaults end up being something that, AWS, or Azure are not going to push an update with a default change that's like totally insecure. At least I hope not.
Yeah.
But like some of them are still sort of operationally meaningful, adjacent enough to security that you'd care. And like you'd actually be surprised. These platforms are so fast moving. You'd be surprised how often that happens.
Yeah, there is lots of stuff. Again, it just goes back, we're saying this shared responsibility model. Not every change is a risk or a security thing, but everything has potential. And if you don't get the right level of visibility into the changes, you can't evaluate that risk, and you can't decide, should I be worried about it or not worried about it too. So yeah, who's making changes? It's a lot more people, processes, technologies, I guess, making changes than you might expect. So that's kind of just been a learning factor as we've kind of been digging into each of these things and kind of sharing with customers. Let's go to our next poll question, and let's see what people think about this. So I'm kind of curious how you're currently managing your configurations in your cloud infrastructure. So let's get that poll up, Mitch.
Already. There you go. You ask and you shall receive.
Well, thank you. Yeah, so it's like just trying to understand kind of how this is happening with people today, how you're managing these configurations. Do you have a dedicated cloud security posture management solution in place, or a CSPM, right? Which is one of those Gartner terms. There's lots of multi-letter terms, okay? Are you using the cloud native tools, right? There's a lot of stuff built into the cloud providers, and it's functional. There's stuff there. Are you looking at open source tools and pulling those down and hosting them or running them? Are you building internal tools because you've got kind of some specific solutions that are like, at our company, we have this, it's this way. We've got some experts in place. We're using them to build some tools. Are things ad hoc or manual? Are you just kind of doing stuff, as you need, but you haven't kind of figured out what your management plan is yet? Maybe you're thinking about which of the top 3 to advocate for. Or is you just not actively managing it, right? Things are just either just haven't got there yet. Things are crazy. You don't believe in configuration, whatever reason. It's just not happening yet. People are all at a different point in their cloud journey, and that's okay. If you're not managing it, that's part of the reason you attend webinars like this, to get the information to bring back and help convince the organization. So how are we doing on poll progress? Looks like we're collecting responses.
Yeah, I've got great responses.
Cool.
Let's close the poll and
We
see
can
if we
close it up. I just kind of talked through it just to kind of give people time to go ahead and take a look. I'm going to look at this one first. I'm going to see a lot of probably the highest number there is open source and internal tools. I kind of wish I would
Yeah,
have
that's interesting to me.
yeah. Now I had previously worked at a pretty large corporation with a lot of technology staff, and we used a lot of internal tools for a while. We had a bunch of custom process, had a legacy. We pulled in some open source and pulled it around. So that's definitely a place a lot of people start at too. So you know what? In the chat, like if somebody's got a really key open source tool or something they use, go ahead and just drop that in. But that's
Yeah, that'd be
interesting.
cool.
That's top. That would just be kind of cool. Which are the ones that are really cool? John, what do you think about this poll? What stands out to you?
It's for me, it's totally the amount of not actively managing or ad hoc manual processes. I think that's the most surprising. I'm a little surprised about how many open source internal tools we have. And then I'm not as surprised about the cloud native tools because like those are sort of there and they're the ones that get, there's a fine line between kind of cloud native tools that are specific to solve some of these problems and things that are just settings in your cloud that you need to track anyway. So that one doesn't surprise me. But yeah, the ad hoc manual process, I mean, we do see a lot in the cloud, and you know this, Kevin, like,
yeah,
the DevOps people, the developers who roll this stuff out, kind of like sometimes the DIY mentality, like to kind of patch these things together. So maybe I shouldn't be as surprised about that.
Yeah, I like writing code. I love building stuff, and sometimes it's fun to dig into the APIs and build it yourself and make it the way you want. It's fun to make things that work. I'm kind of surprised a little that a dedicated CSPM is pretty much coming in last place here. But I guess that's another good reason for having a webinar like this and talking to people is just kind of what's holding people back from a dedicated CSPM. That'll be just kind of interesting if anyone's got a question or chat related to that. But that coming in last is a little surprising. But you and I know, John, as we've been kind of doing industry stuff over the last year plus, that just kind of, if there isn't a magic quadrant for it, if it isn't articles on it, it's hard to kind of get some traction, especially with these things, these kind of 4-letter acronyms. They're always changing, and what does posture even mean when you talk about cloud security posture management?
Okay, Kevin, we've
Yeah,
got
it doesn't necessarily.
I was going to
Go
say,
ahead.
there's a good question out there.
Right.
Tell me if you want to do this now or maybe a little bit later. They're asking about
we can do it now.
customers maintaining visibility and continuing to support a wide range of services, especially when they're in more than one cloud. So we talked about the complexity, but what about when you're across multiple clouds and all these services that each of the cloud providers offer?
Yeah.
Oh man, I mean, it adds a whole nother dimension. That just adds it. It essentially kind of accentuates all of the problems you have with even scaling in one provider.
Yeah.
So that's, and if you're going back to like ad hoc and rolling your own and some of those things, some of that might be just indicative of the place on the cloud journey, because a lot of those things are perfectly fine, particularly in the cloud that are meant to, they're built to be extensible. But kind of when you scale, and particularly you bring up an awesome point, Mitch, when you scale to another cloud, and then it's an order of magnitude kind of jump in complexity as you're trying to patch all these things together.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Awesome.
I was going to say, one of the tough things for me when I switch from one cloud to the other cloud, just understanding that things kind of have the same name. Sometimes they have different names, but they're the same thing. Is a load balancer really a load balancer? Is it network level or application level? Just some of the problem with managing multiple cloud and understanding is just logically grouping things together. Right? You kind of want to just tag, well, these are all the types of things that are network, or these are the types of things that are load balancer, these are database, or these are storage, and get some sort of clue, because the particular names of the services, especially, I hate to pick on them because I love AWS, but they name stuff like randomly. I think they got some magic 8-ball or some machine learning algorithm that like was was going on Twitter troll feeds to get names of things. But it's hard to tell from the names of certain services like what they are. Microsoft is worse in one respect because they take really common words and string them together and just make it really long, right? So neither cloud, the vendor is great at naming. But you kind of want to know what's the real purpose for that naming. So some of the challenge when you're multi-cloud is that visibility across which things are similar. What do I need to worry about? Which things expose a public IP, so I want to make sure my networking or security are in place. Getting those extra kind of index dimensions across stuff, I think is the thing that I've found is kind of how you have to go to get the right level of visibility.
No, I don't think Azure SQL database for Postgres is too long of a name at all. It's not just a bunch of words strung together.
Yeah, you just string the words together. Yeah. All right, thanks for that question. Any more questions that are coming up? If not,
that was good.
We'll move on.
Yeah, I thought that was a really good one. I think one question, there's a couple of questions about, I've got so much complexity in essence. I've got so much complexity. Where do I get started? How do we get started with getting this under control? Because it is daunting when you've got all these applications, all the software in multiple environments. Any best practice recommendations, or just how do you get started?
I mean, I think that, so a little bit of it is this, if that's your problem and it's so much complexity, oh my gosh, like where do I get started? I think some of this is, okay, well, let's start out with, I got to know what I have, good or bad, I got to know what I have. So I'm going to focus first on how I'm able to maintain like an inventory, if you will. And then from there, it's like, okay, now if I now know everything I have and I know how it's configured, now we're kind of talking the state stuff that we are now. And you're to the point where you can start to talk about some of the qualitative questions of the environment. So, okay, now I know what I have, but is it configured right? And from there, there's lots of different things. And one of the, I'll see I'm interested in what you have to say, Kevin, but the last thing I would say is when you're at that point, relying on the third-party kind of benchmarks and relying on like the well-architected frameworks is pretty useful, because the thing to remember about the cloud is you actually have some economies of scale. Whether it's like GE or a little mom and pop shop, they're using the same AWS, they're using the same Azure. So there is a little bit more economies of scale, so you can rely on some of these third party, hey, this is how you should be configuring this AWS service, for instance.
Yeah.
What do you think, Kevin?
I like to think, I've been in the industry a while. I worked at companies. We had a data center. You ran data centers, John. It's like knowing what you have there. It's like there's no API for it, right? You're just you put it on there. Hopefully you put a physical sticker on it. Maybe you kept it like a piece of paper, maybe a spreadsheet, who knows what, right? It was hard to know what you had, plus what was installed on it. Then we had this big era of let's have these CMDBs. Let's just drive everything. Let's register everything in this big monolithic place, and that's the only place I can revision. And that way, then I know it's kind of like the DevOps, SecOps, and Terraform thing today. Oh, if we just start there, everything's fine. When we kicked this off and we talked about a management plane or control plane APIs and visibility, the really interesting thing is the cloud providers have APIs. You can discover everything that you have. You can do it all by querying it. You can do it by getting events as things are created. So part of the complexity of managing is just what's being created, what type of services, at what region it's in, do I have tagging on it, and that just from almost a kind of a meta point of view, a control point of view. And that doesn't even dig into the specific workloads and what's installed on the services and what third-party components installed, and a whole bunch of dimensions to the problem. But the right visibility is just even starting with knowing what you have, figuring out, why do I have these different kinds of databases? Why are we using these different kinds of services? Just from a top level view, where should I focus? I have the most of this type of thing. That's the thing I should probably go dive into first. Plus, like you said, John, the framework, starting with some security benchmarks, get some best practices in place. Start with the kind of the easy button checkbox things, and then kind of move on to your domain specific kind of complexity. I think I want to kind of move on and just, we've got, I want to leave even a little more time at the end for questions, but I kind of want to demo a couple things, kind of some specific visibility things that we were running into as we were just kind of designing this talk and kind of coming up with the scenarios. So that's kind of what I'm going to kick off to Mitch now. How much time are we leaving at the end for questions, given that we've kind of done a couple questions throughout?
I think you've answered some really good along the
Okay.
way. What I'll do is, if some more come in, I'll jump in. But I think take some time for the demo, folks.
Okay, cool. Let's do that. I want to just make sure we're balancing the time all right. So I was, playing around with some Azure stuff the other day, and you can see on my screen here that I've got this storage account in Microsoft Azure, and storage accounts are great for demos because they're cheap. They don't burn up a lot of money when they're just running, because if you don't fill them with data. But there's a lot of options on a storage account you can set. You can decide if basically if HTTPS is enabled or not, right? You can say the blobs have public access. What's the minimum TLS version? You can put a bunch of properties on them that are kind of security related and interesting. So I like demoing with storage accounts just because it's kind of interesting. So for some fun and games, I decided I was going to play around with some Terraform. And I was going to put this Terraform in GitHub, pretend I'm a real DevOps expert, get some GitHub actions in place, get them to plan and apply my Terraform. And then I just kind of ended up building up this file kind of over time. I put in the state, and then I put in the resource group, then I put in the storage account, and then I started like changing properties on it throughout the time. And because I'm not a very good DevOps person, I ended up spending some time with the GitHub action. I did some Terraform applies for my local terminal. I did some changes in the portal. So I was making changes different places, kind of with different identities. And if you look at the history kind of from a GitHub point of view, I had set up pull request based commits. I had a couple problems in there. I had a problem. One, I'd configured stuff wrong in my pipeline. I had a different problem with the TLS 1.2, which I'll point out later, which was kind of like a Terraform flaw. But then I had other things that like committed and came through, breaking HTTPS and fixing HTTPS as I pushed these things through. But again, I wasn't very mature in my org, and sometimes I was on the terminal and I was doing the apply. So I don't even know like what I changed and when really. But what's kind of interesting then when you look at kind of where OpsCompass sits and how we think about that, we think about this from this drift point of view. So every one of those changes that I either made as part of that GitHub action flow, or I made as a local change, or I made as a change in the portal, they all came across as a configuration change on this resource, and just kind of monitoring those type of changes as kind of like discrete events or changes in state become really interesting. And then you can see here that because I wanted to kind of highlight the stuff I was going to do for this webinar, in our tool, I actually set up a custom, what's known as a drift concern, that just monitored storage accounts in my certain AWS account. So I could get those flagged with my own little like kind of icon key there. I think I picked a bad color for the webinar, but just as a way to kind of like tag those things. And I put that on the team that I'm on. So that's kind of how I kind of set up this problem. But you look here, and here was an interesting change, and it's actually one of the last changes that happened. And this highlights a number of things. One, you see that this was a change to my resource, okay? It's the storage account. Two, you actually see who made the change. And who made the change in this case was the service provider I created in Azure for my webinar stuff. So I registered a service provider. That's the secret key that I put in my GitHub action so the Terraform would automatically apply. So this is a change that probably is a change that should have been made because it was the pipeline that made the change for me. But you can see some things happened here in it, even though I intentionally said I was going to fix HTTPS, and that went from like false to true. This TLS, minimum TLS version, backed off from 1.2 to 1. Okay, that was kind of odd, and it was because I had to go change that in the portal. I had to go in the portal and actually set that setting. So this setting right here on TLS version, I changed it in the portal. And you might say, why did you change that in the portal? And the reason is I tried to change it in Terraform, and I tried to run it locally. And for some reason, the documented property, I couldn't get it to work. I don't know if it's a back level version. I don't know if I have the right resource provider. There's probably a reason, but it just wasn't working for me. So that's why I went in the cloud and did it. And I don't know. And maybe I was in a rush. I'm doing this. I'm prepping for this demo. I don't have time to figure it out. Maybe it's a production problem that's going on. Maybe this was one of the security things. I just went to the portal and made the change. But because I made the change in the portal, this value didn't stay in my Terraform plan file. So then, as you see, what happened when I pushed the latest version into Terraform, the state didn't match, and it basically rolled back the TLS version. So just kind of looking through a couple changes you see here, you'll see here is when it went from 1 to 1.2. That's when I did it as a person, and I was in the portal and doing it. Other changes I made, just turning on and off some HTTPS traffic, that was me in the portal, or that was me even on the command line running it. But when you look back to the initial creation, that was done by the pipeline. So just knowing who made the change, how they made the change, just I think key to the right part of visibility. John, anything you want to kind of add to this before I move to the next part?
Kind of harkening back to an earlier slide, we talked about one of the things with state monitoring is validating CI/CD outcomes. And this is like a really good example of there's definitely the need to be able to find problems in your pipeline, and definitely having policy as code and having as many controls as reasonable early on in the process is great, but it's just, there's so many of these little examples of if you take your eye off the ball and you're not validating those CI/CD deployments and you're not tracking what's actually happening, there's so many little blind spots. The other thing is we have a customer, and I was involved with this issue, and this sort of reminded me of it. They run Kubernetes clusters in AWS, and there was a very business critical thing that needed to happen, let's say, and I won't go into too many details there, but they had to upgrade Kubernetes to make this happen. And the problem they were having is in their CI/CD pipeline, they were using AWS CLI, and there was a dependency problem. So to upgrade EKS, they needed to do an upgrade to their CLI, which broke other things. And this was like a prod kind of, so they had to break the policy of, hey, we don't do anything in the portal. And it's just kind of one of those things where, a couple of times it's like, okay, this is an edge case, but you really need to plan for that stuff because it's just a fact of running infrastructure this way.
Yeah, those changes. And I just brought us up to another screen where we show that change history of that resource. Just something that in kind of our state monitoring we like to capture. We like to capture as those changes happen. Yeah, the problems that are fixed and the changes and the tags we put in place.
Yeah, and those concerns are really cool because, in real time as we're inspecting those configurations, it's essentially labeling them with a type of concern, and those are configurable. So those are multi-cloud. So now you can really easily at scale, keep track of just the networking related changes across, Azure, AWS, GCP, and filter out a ton of that noise and get to, hey, show me when somebody's adding IP ranges, or show me my subnets, things of that nature. So that's a really useful way to take that state, which is really noisy, all the changes, and from a abstracted multi-cloud sense, kind of label those important things that you care about. Make sure you see them.
The only thing I don't like about this screen is you can see I was doing this stuff last night when I probably should have planned to have a little more. So let's just skip past that. Another interesting, a couple interesting things we have left. Here's just an example of something we monitored where, look, it was your AWS root user made a change. Now, this was early on in setting up some admin access when we were actually setting up as root. So this isn't as big of an offense as it sounds, but just being able to monitor that, hey, root was in and made a change. Yeah, this is stuff that goes in the CloudTrail log, but having it come across and having it categorized, just another good, interesting example of a change being made.
And having this history.
Yeah.
I mean, a very rich example of something that happened quite a while ago. It's often very hard to recreate those things if you're trying to go back from a forensics perspective or whatever it is.
Yeah, especially from the right level of visibility. You don't want to take those CloudTrail logs are so huge, and querying them is tough. Just having kind of the right flow in. The kind of almost, I'll say, maybe last example that I want to touch on was I was getting our demo environment for Azure hooked up to our demo environment for AWS, and I was using AWS SSO. And with AWS SSO, you can hook it up to an external identity provider. So I hooked it up to our Azure AD tenant that I have, so I could just use kind of one set of credentials and log into both clouds. So what was interesting here is, we detected that this application, which was kind of an enterprise application, was created inside of the Azure AD tenant, and it had some users assigned to it from my Azure AD in place. So that's a resource that is it Azure resource? Well, no, it's Azure AD, and Azure AD is the tenant, and the tenant is really kind of different. We have the Office 365 icon there. So that was part of the change in that cloud. But one of the changes that came in the other cloud was when I went into the portal and I set up AWS SSO, because there wasn't great APIs for it, and I was doing it for the first time, and I wanted to just kind of have the wizards walk it through me. I was able to set it up all there and copy and paste the things back and forth between AWS and Azure to get the trust in place. But it then behind the scenes creates this IAM role for me. It's called AWS Reserved SSO Administrator Access, and then some value there. And when you look at the current configuration, you'll see things like, do not delete, right? These are reserved. They're under this path. So there's stuff that the cloud provider is creating behind the scenes related to the stuff I'm doing, but this isn't an AWS SSO resource. This is literally a role, and there's some policies that were created, and there's some other mappings. So as these kind of cloud services kind of build on other building blocks of the cloud, just even getting visibility into what's changed. It's not something I changed. It's something I initiated the change on, but it's nice to see a feed of things coming across for that. And you can even see that, like, because of what we monitor, we also know the last time we used the role. So you can see I haven't logged in using that for a while because I still have those IAM credentials. So I think, that's probably, I think I can just end there with kind of the stuff I was just kind of demoing, the examples of kind of having the tool that's got the right visibility to like be able to see the types of changes you want. So that's kind of the, like, with the demo. We like to say that, the cloud providers build stuff kind of one way for customers, but when you use like a third party or an open source or custom, you can kind of see it the way you want. So I think it boils down to this kind of organizations have choices. John, do you want to kind of go over some of this?
You've got a great, because you've been there on the cloud architect side. I think that you taught me. I think that you taught me this. But it is like, from the perspective of inside of an organization, just like put tools and vendors and brands aside, like you do really only have a finite kind of set of ways forward, and you have to make some trade-offs and make some decisions about that. I'll let you have your glory on that one.
I think organizations haven't adopted CSPM because they don't want to pay a vendor. They want stuff that's kind of like cheaper. They're about time's valuable, money's valuable, features are valuable. Open source sounds great because you get these features for no cost, but it takes you time. You got to stand up, you got to run it. It depends on your organization. Some are really good at it. Writing your own gives you the most power, but it's the most things that you have to deal with. It costs you time. It probably costs you money. You're paying salary, but you get the features you want is good. You pay a vendor, you're trading money for time. You're getting the features. So it's like, really, what's like the ideal? I feel like the ideal is you just get you get a vendor that's doing it for you, but you don't have to pay them. Kind of the concept of a free tier. Wouldn't that be cool, John?
Yes, yeah. So, and nice way to slip that in there, Kevin. And we got a question earlier about where to start and complexity and that sort of thing. And the great thing about that free tier, and like we've seen it, especially when companies are getting going and you're trying to figure these things out. Sometimes it's not even that your manager's cheap. Sometimes it's that you're really trying to figure out exactly what you need. A CSPM might look really good, but you're still kind of 3 steps before that, trying to get a handle on like, well, what would I use it for and who would use it and those sorts of things. So one of the cool things about our free tier is that it kind of recognizes that. And it's basically gives you kind of the deep inventory, discoverability, visibility of OpsCompass. Now you don't get all the cool bells and whistles, the qualitative stuff like, hey, is this stuff set up right? And can I integrate it with things? But it's really meant to be exactly that way to remove the barriers of you at least getting started and starting to kind of get your arms around these things.
Yeah, just being able to get that visibility, seeing the right, seeing that overview, getting that inventory, that's just really powerful to kind of even know the type of problem you have to help you move from not actively managing or ad hoc up to kind of a more defined process and a tool. So that's.
Let's try it out. It takes like 10 minutes to set up. Like it's all about being easy. Like everybody, DevOps engineers, architects, we're all busy. So the other thing that we really optimize for is how do we save time? All this is about saving time because at the end of the day, you've got to be able to scale these things and you often don't have more budget to do so. You just have more responsibilities and you're expected to perform better.
So that's the last slide I have, Mitch. What do we have questions? How do we want to close this out?
Yeah, great. I think you kind of talked about this a little bit earlier. The question was about what types of threats are you hearing your customers talk about? We had that whole poll survey for that. I'm curious. So I think we've just whoever submitted that one, I think we've covered it. One thing is that if I can ask you a question,
sure.
We're always dealing with governance and compliance and regulatory issues. Anytime you talk security, anytime you talk about creating software, and it seems like there's a lot of information that is being generated or can be tracked or can be used to help you go through an audit, go through a compliance review, some of those kind of things. Just the fact that you have a process that's documented and it's followed and here's the data to prove it. Can you share some of the situations where that maybe have been extremely helpful to a customer?
I've got one that's been helpful to a customer. They were in a regulated industry and they had to pre-approve changes, schedule them, get all that kind of paperwork in place. But they also had to capture evidence that they made the change for the full cycle. It was kind of, I wouldn't say extreme case, but one of the reasons they really liked OpsCompass is they had the ticket, they executed the change, and what they used to have to do is go take a screenshot of something in a tool to make sure they had the change in place because they didn't have a record that they made the change for a future audit. Using the drift changes we saw in OpsCompass, they were able to do that. So there's kind of steps that's an extreme example of a manual step. Other places is just getting stuff categorized at a high level, just finding all my open endpoints, all my unencrypted, buckets, just that from, those mapping those high level kind of problems like encryption down to detailed level resources and roles. That's kind of my thoughts on it.
Yeah, I think compliance and audit is kind of the entry point to CSPM. It's even if you don't have your arms totally around it, you usually know somebody's there to tell you that you have an audit coming up or whatever, regulatory responsibilities. So that pretty quickly sends a signal, okay, we maybe need a better way to do this. Although I can't tell you how many times we see people still doing that with spreadsheets and manually going out and validating things, which, most of these require that you're actually documenting the changes and that you actually have something that's at least periodic that's checking these things. So it's still a little bit of a mess, but I do think that you make a good point in that compliance and audit really ends up kind of being a gateway to these sorts of tools for sure.
Great. We always have an audit coming up. There's always one living. Yeah. So, well, good. We're just about out of time. Thank you.
Or a bad one that just passed.
Or just passed.
Thank you, Mitch.
John Grain, CTO with OpsCompass, and Kevin Hawkinson, Director of Customer Success with OpsCompass. Do want to let folks know about our gift card giveaway. Our 4 winners are Eliza R., Juan F., Scott D., and Nick R. The folks at DevOps.com will be getting a hold of you about how to get those gift certificates. So gentlemen, fantastic job. Really appreciate you sharing your knowledge and experience and customer experiences with everyone today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You bet. And we want to thank you, our audience, for being with us. You spent almost entire hour with us. Your time is extremely valuable. We know it's busy times these days. So we thank you for that. We're honored that you would spend it with us, and we hope you've used it well. So be well, be safe out there, and take care, everybody.